Hello everyone, welcome to Service Virtualization Training, and before we delve into the training content, let me tell you a couple of words about the resources that you will use throughout this training. I used the links in the description of this video to download these three files. The most important one of them is this zip file. When you unzip it, you will see quite a lot of sample messages and sample scripts, and we'll use these later for some of the hands-on exercises. There is also a couple of special SV agents to import and special virtual services. These will help you automatically check your progress. In this training, you will gradually build a virtual service. You'll be adding more and more features, and these special virtual services will help test whether the features were implemented as required, whether everything works, and if you have an issue there, it may also provide you some hints. Then we have this install guide, basically describing how to download the SV Designer Express Edition for free from the Micro Focus Marketplace and how to install it locally on your machine. It's pretty simple, just clicking next, next, next. And then we have this third important file with hands-on instructions. So in this training, I will always explain the new feature. I will demonstrate that feature on some hands-on exercise. I'll show you all the steps needed to finish that hands-on exercise. And when you want to do the same locally, you're encouraged to follow these steps. These are just brief descriptions of what steps need to be followed in order to correctly complete that particular hands-on exercise. So this is not the explanation of the feature. That's just a summary of steps that I took when I explained the feature and when I showed how to complete that particular hands-on exercise. So you are encouraged to follow these steps as well. Now let's have a look inside the SV Designer and what are the things you need to know before you start creating your first virtual service. So very important section can be accessed by clicking this icon. This is the agent list. It's also accessible from tools, options, agents, like this. You can see we support quite many categories of agents, and inside each of these categories you can have many agents created of the same type. And agents are basically components that are capable of sending and receiving a message over some form of transport. So this is the technical layer. In these agents, you will usually find some technical settings that you need to correctly fill in order to be able to connect to that particular form of transport. In general, in SV, we try to bother you with these technical settings as little as possible. So agents, that's the part of SV where you will find these technical details, and in all other parts you will mostly deal with business behavior of your virtual services. So it will be important to understand it from the business point of view, but still there is this technical layer, these agents. You need to set them up in advance because virtual services are deployed on these agents, so you need a couple of agents up and running to start building a virtualization project. As you can see, I have a couple of agents running here, mostly these HTTP agents, also some Java agent, and so on. When creating a virtual service, you decide on which agent that particular service will be deployed. And here you can see I have this HTTP gateway agent selected. It's currently running, that's why it is green, and you can see it's listening on this port. Here, these agents run inside the embedded server, which is a special SV server running inside your designer. So I'll talk about standalone SV servers a bit later, but this embedded server is some kind of small server running inside each SV designer, and people use it usually for developing projects locally. So you work on your embedded server, and then finally, when you reached a sufficient level of maturity of your virtual services, you will move your virtual service to some standalone server for other users to see and use. So these agents, as you can see, are created on my embedded server, and this embedded server runs locally here on this machine. And as you can see, one of these technical settings for this HTTP agent is the port where it is listening. So basically this HTTP gateway agent now processes all calls to this machine and port 7200. So we could test it. We could test it. I don't know, in from the browser. When I do something like this and then test some endpoint, test like this, you can see as we replied that this endpoint is not existing. And as you can see, the HTTP gateway agent, that's the agent which responded with this message. So the agent is there. We haven't deployed any endpoint like this, and that's the reason of this error message here. But it seems like the agent is up and ready for some endpoints to be deployed. So during our exercises, we'll create a virtual endpoint listening on one of these agents, and that's where our virtual service will listen. But that doesn't mean that your virtual service has to listen locally on this machine. It can be also deployed on a different server, hosted on different machine, perhaps in a different environment, because you should see this SV designer as a sort of a client to manage various SV servers. By default, you always has this embedded server available, but you can add multiple other standalone servers. Just you need to add links to them so that this particular designer could manage them. And you do this on this servers tab, which is also accessible by clicking this icon. And to make it possible to deploy services on different servers, you need to add links to these servers. You do it by clicking this add link and adding our REST management API. For example, this one is the REST management API of our training server running in the cloud. So any SV server is managed over this REST API, and all our tools, our command line tools, our web management, as well as this designer, they all use this REST management API to deploy services, undeploy services, download statistics, change service state, and so on. So by specifying the URL and also credentials, as you can see, I already used this URL before, so if you want to change the credentials, you can do it using this dialog. So after setting up the URL and specifying credentials, you can see we have this green status. It means that we are currently connected to this standalone server. This one is running somewhere in Azure. So when I go back to this agents list and collapse the embedded server, you can see we have now two servers. And the second one has a slightly different set of agents. You can see there is a couple of agents running that I created for different students in our cloud environment. So here you can see practically that you can have a different set of agents created on different servers, because anyway, those are two different environments. And Also, the technical details of these servers may be different. For example, you can see here the certificate path is a Linux one, since this SV server runs in Docker. This one runs on Windows, so yeah, so the path is different here. Yeah, so different SV servers can have different setup on this technical level, different set of agents, but sometimes you want to move your service between various standalone servers, and perhaps also between the embedded server and the standalone server. In that case, if you have the same agent serving the same purpose on different environment, it's good to think about some naming convention, since if you create an agent with the same name on your embedded server and on your standalone server, moving your virtual services between these environments, these servers will be simpler, since SV, based on the name, will identify which agent plays which role, and it will help you make this process smoother. But sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes simply you need to have a completely different set of agents with different names on different environments. And you can add as many SV servers here as needed, since each of these servers is licensed separately. And similar to what we saw on the embedded server, also these agents running in the cloud are ready for some virtual service to be deployed on them. So possibly this one, when I take its external URL to the browser and do something similar that I showed you previously, like write test path here, we will get a similar error that the path is not deployed there, but the agent is ready, listening there. So you can use SV Designer to deploy some virtual service on this agent, and see it's running on a completely different machine somewhere in the cloud. So in case you move your virtual service from the embedded server to some standalone server, the virtual service will function in the same way, except that the URL may be different depending on what agent you deploy it.